"You can't just set up here. This isn't your kind of neighborhood," Mr. Thompson barked, glaring at Jasmine and Marcus as they arranged tables for their garage sale. His words cut through the calm morning air, sharp and loaded, shattering the quiet hopefulness of their efforts. Jasmine froze mid-tack, her hands gripping a stack of old books, while Marcus shot him a look that could have silenced anyone else, but not Mr. Thompson. "This isn't your neighborhood." Mr. Thompson's voice boomed like thunder, cutting through the quiet suburban air as he stormed into Jasmine's driveway. His face was flushed with anger, veins bulging on his forehead as he kicked over a table stacked with children's toys. Plastic cars and stuffed animals scattered across the pavement, their cheerful colors now trampled underfoot. Jasmine froze, her heart pounding as she watched her hard work crumble before her eyes. Her toddler clung to her leg, whimpering softly. The sound of shattering glass followed. A picture frame that had been perched precariously on the edge of another table fell and broke, its shards glinting accusingly in the sunlight. "You're ruining property values," Mr. Thompson spat, his tone dripping with disdain. He pointed an accusatory finger at her, his words sharp enough to cut. "People don't want this kind of thing around here." Jasmine's breath hitched. She wanted to scream back, to tell him how wrong he was, but the chaos overwhelmed her. Neighbors began to gather, their curious gazes adding weight to the moment. It wasn't just about the garage sale anymore. It felt personal, targeted. Tears streamed down Jasmine's cheeks, but her jaw remained clenched, a silent rebellion against the storm raging around her. She held Elijah closer, shielding him not just from the broken glass, but from the ugliness unfolding before them. Her lips parted, trembling as she tried to speak. "This is my home," she whispered hoarsely, though the words barely made it past her throat. They were caught there, tangled in fear and frustration. How could she explain to someone who refused to listen? She took a step forward, her legs unsteady beneath her. For a fleeting second, defiance flickered in her chest, but then she saw the look in Mr. Thompson's eyes, cold, unwavering, and it dimmed. Still, she didn't back down entirely. Something inside her refused to let him win, even if all she could do was stand there breathing heavily, tears staining her cheeks. Behind her, the murmurs of neighbors grew louder, or maybe it only felt that way because of the deafening silence within her own mind. Some stood frozen, phones raised to capture every humiliating second. Others shuffled awkwardly, avoiding eye contact altogether. An elderly woman leaned toward her husband, her voice barely audible above the commotion. "It's just a garage sale," she muttered, shaking her head dismissively. But those 5 words carried more weight than she realized. Just a garage sale. As if Jasmine's livelihood, her dignity, could be reduced to something so trivial. A young man recorded the scene, his phone steady despite the tension crackling in the air. No one stepped forward to intervene, to say anything in Jasmine's defense. Their collective silence spoke volumes, echoing the same apathy that had allowed injustices like this to fester for generations. Jasmine noticed none of it directly. Her focus remained locked on Mr. Thompson. Yet the absence of support pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than any insult he could hurl. The wail of sirens shattered the tense atmosphere, slicing through the hum of whispers and accusations. Jasmine's body stiffened instantly, her grip tightening around Elijah. She turned slowly toward the sound, dread pooling in her stomach. "Not again," she murmured under her breath, her voice flooded audible even to herself. Memories flooded back. Past encounters with law enforcement, moments when explanations fell flat and assumptions ruled supreme. Would they believe her side of the story this time? Or would they see only what Mr. Thompson wanted them to see? The police car screeched to a halt at the curb, its flashing lights casting harsh shadows across the driveway. Jasmine swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay rooted where she stood. She couldn't run, couldn't hide. Not now, not ever. Not when doing so would mean letting fear dictate her life. As footsteps approached, the world seemed to blur around her. Everything narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat, rapid and uneven, drowning out everything else. And then darkness. Jasmine hummed softly, her voice barely audible over the gentle gurgle of coffee brewing in the kitchen. The aroma filled the air, a small comfort amidst the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She glanced at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, each envelope a stark reminder of the financial strain since Marcus had been laid off months ago. "It'll get better," she whispered to herself, more out of habit than belief. Her hands moved steadily, pouring the steaming liquid into a chipped mug. Despite everything, the sleepless nights, the endless worry, she refused to let despair take root. Today was their chance to turn things around. The garage sale wasn't just about making ends meet, it was about proving they could rise above. Outside, Marcus worked with quiet determination, arranging tables and neatly laying out items they'd collected over weeks. Each piece told a story. A lamp that once lit late-night conversations, toys Elijah had outgrown, books whose pages still held memories of shared laughter. "Almost ready," Jasmine called from the doorway, balancing 2 cups of coffee. Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans before taking one of the mugs. "Yeah, just need to set up the last table." His tone was steady, but there was an undercurrent of hope in his words. They both knew how much this day meant, not just for their finances, but for their sense of dignity. Jasmine nodded, watching him for a moment longer. Their modest home stood behind them, its worn siding a testament to years of sacrifice and hard work. Yet, despite its imperfections, it was theirs, a place where love thrived, even when resources were scarce. As Jasmine carried the empty mugs back inside, her thoughts drifted to the subtle slights they'd endured since moving into the neighborhood. There were the invitations to block parties that never came, the awkward silences when they greeted neighbors during evening walks. Once, someone had complained about loud music after Marcus played jazz softly in the backyard during dinner. She sighed, setting the mugs down harder than intended. These moments might have seemed minor to others, but they added up, chipping away at her sense of belonging. It wasn't overt hostility, at least not until now, but rather a constant reminder that no matter how hard they tried, some people would always see them as outsiders. Still, Jasmine pushed those thoughts aside. Dwelling on them wouldn't change anything. What mattered was today, right here, right now. From the living room, Elijah's giggles broke through the tension like sunlight-piercing clouds. Jasmine peeked in to find him sprawled on the floor, building towers with mismatched blocks. His joy was infectious, a balm to her weary soul. She knelt beside him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You're going to have so many cool new toys after today," she said, forcing a smile. Elijah grinned up at her, oblivious to the struggles swirling around them. At that moment, Jasmine felt a surge of resolve. No matter what happened outside those walls, she would fight for him, for a future where he didn't have to face the same battles she did. The memory of Elijah's laughter lingered as Jasmine stepped back outside, only to be met with devastation. The carefully arranged tables lay overturned, their belongings scattered across the driveway like debris after a storm. Her breath caught in her throat as she took in the wreckage. The shattered picture frame, the trampled toys, the remnants of hours spent preparing for this day. Her legs felt heavy, each step forward requiring monumental effort. The confrontation with Mr. Thompson replayed in her mind, his cruel words echoing louder than the sirens that had followed. How had it come to this? Jasmine clenched her fists, fighting back tears. This wasn't just about a ruined garage sale. It was about something far deeper, something systemic, and as she stood there, surrounded by chaos, she realized the fight wasn't over. Not yet. "Oh, having a little flea market, huh? Hope you don't attract any riffraff," Mr. Thompson sneered as he approached the driveway, his voice dripping with condescension. His eyes scanned the setup with obvious disdain, lingering on every item like it was somehow beneath him. Jasmine forced a polite smile, though her stomach churned at his tone. "Just trying to make some extra money," she replied evenly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. But Mr. Thompson wasn't satisfied. He smirked, shaking his head slightly before leaning in closer. "Well, I hope this doesn't become a regular thing. Some of us have standards around here." His words hung in the air, heavy and loaded, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Jasmine swallowed hard but said nothing, focusing instead on arranging a stack of books. She could feel the tension building already, a storm cloud forming over what had started as a hopeful morning. As more neighbors trickled in, curiosity piqued by the commotion, Mr. Thompson seized the opportunity to escalate his attack. "Interesting prices you've got here," he remarked loudly, picking up a vintage lamp. "Are you sure this isn't stolen?" A few bystanders chuckled nervously, their laughter sharp and awkward, cutting through the quiet hum of conversation. Others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact altogether. Jasmine clenched her fists briefly before forcing herself to respond calmly. "Everything here is mine, or my family's. If you're interested, I can tell you where each piece came from." Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow mockingly. "Oh, I'm sure you can spin quite the story." His sarcasm drew another round of uneasy giggles from the crowd. The weight of their complicity pressed down on Jasmine. These were people she saw almost daily, people who smiled politely when they passed on the street, but now, faced with an opportunity to stand up, they chose silence, or worse, amusement. Then came the moment that shattered whatever semblance of civility remained. Mr. Thompson pointed dramatically at a weathered lawn chair tucked near the edge of the display. "That chair," he barked, loud enough to turn heads. "It belongs to me. You must have taken it from my yard." Jasmine froze, disbelief washing over her face. "No, sir," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. "That chair has been in my family for years. Here." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, pulling up an old photo album app. "See? This was taken at our last housewarming party. That's the same chair." She held up the image, showing it to anyone who would look. But Mr. Thompson didn't back down. Instead, he snatched the phone from her hand, holding it high so others couldn't see clearly. "Photoshopped garbage," he spat, tossing it carelessly onto the table. "Everyone knows how easy it is to fake evidence these days." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Some seemed uncertain, glancing between Jasmine and Mr. Thompson. Others nodded along with him, unwilling to question his authority. Jasmine felt her resolve waver for the first time. Her proof meant nothing if no one believed her. Jasmine stood frozen, the murmurs around her blending into a dull roar. She realized then that no matter how calm, how composed she remained, it wouldn't be enough. Every word she spoke was twisted, every action scrutinized. Her mind raced, searching for something, anything that might sway the growing tide against her. But the truth hit her like a brick wall. There was no winning here, not when the deck was stacked so heavily in Mr. Thompson's favor. She glanced at the faces surrounding her, hoping for even a flicker of support, but all she found were blank stares, nervous smiles, or outright hostility. The injustice burned in her chest, a bitter ache that refused to fade. Yet, beneath the frustration, a spark of defiance lingered. If they wouldn't listen now, maybe someone else would later. "This right here, this is a clear violation," Mr. Thompson bellowed, brandishing a crumpled stack of papers like they were weapons. His voice carried across the driveway, drawing more neighbors to the growing spectacle. "You're breaking HOA rules and I won't stand for it. Fines, legal action. It's all on the table now." Jasmine clenched her fists tighter, trying to steady herself against the wave of humiliation crashing over her. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, one of the bystanders chimed in nervously. "He's got a point, Jasmine. Maybe you should have checked the guidelines first." The comment stung worse than any insult from Mr. Thompson. It wasn't just him anymore. It was everyone else, too, nodding along, unwilling to question his authority or defend her. Their silence felt heavier than his accusations, compounding the injustice with every passing second. Mr. Thompson smirked, emboldened by their tacit support. "That's right," he said smugly. "We have standards around here. People don't want this chaos ruining our neighborhood. As the argument escalated, phones began to appear, held aloft, recording every heated exchange as if it were a live performance. Someone chuckled awkwardly, whispering to their friend, "This is wild. Feels like reality TV." Jasmine caught snippets of their conversations between Mr. Thompson's tirades. They weren't here to help. They were here to watch, to capture footage that would later be shared online without context. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. These weren't just neighbors. They were spectators, treating her pain as entertainment. Her hands trembled as she tried to focus on defending herself, but the weight of their indifference made it nearly impossible. Each laugh, each muttered comment chipped away at what little resolve she had left. The sound of tires screeching interrupted the chaos. Marcus stormed into the driveway, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Mr. Thompson turned to him, sneering. "Oh, look who decided to show up. The boy who doesn't know his place. Maybe you can teach your wife some manners while you're at it." Marcus froze, the slur hitting him like a slap. "Excuse me?" he growled, stepping closer. "You don't get to talk to us like that." Before he could say more, another neighbor stepped forward, grabbing Marcus's arm. "Calm down, man. No need to make things worse." But Marcus shrugged him off, lunging toward Mr. Thompson. The crowd gasped, some stepping back while others closed in, eager to see what happened next. Another neighbor intervened, restraining Marcus just as tempers flared even higher. Amidst the shouting and shoving, a piercing wail cut through the air. Elijah clung to Jasmine's leg, tears streaming down his face as he cried uncontrollably. The noise and tension had overwhelmed him, leaving him terrified. Jasmine scooped him up immediately, pressing his head to her chest. "It's okay, baby," she murmured, though her own voice cracked under the strain. "Mommy's got you." She glanced around, searching for someone, anyone, who might step in and stop the madness. But all she saw were faces glued to their phones, capturing her son's distress without a hint of remorse. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Mr. Thompson had said so far. The arrival of police sirens only heightened the chaos. Officers stepped out of their car, eyes scanning the scene before zeroing in on Marcus. One of them barked, "Sir, step away with your hands where we can see them." "What? Why me?" Marcus protested, still struggling against the neighbor holding him back. "Don't play dumb," Mr. Thompson interjected, pointing an accusatory finger. "He attacked me. Look at my shirt. He tore it." Jasmine rushed forward, clutching Elijah tightly. "No, that's not true. He didn't do anything wrong. Please, listen to me." But the officers ignored her, already moving to handcuff Marcus. "Ma'am, stay back," one of them ordered sternly, dismissing her pleas without hesitation. Jasmine's heart sank as she watched them lead Marcus to the patrol car, his protests fading into the distance. Her legs felt weak, threatening to give out beneath her. The crowd began to disperse, satisfied now that the problem had been dealt with. Jasmine stood frozen, clutching Elijah close as the reality of the situation settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Her mind raced, replaying everything that had just happened. The accusations, the laughter, the indifference, the handcuffs. How could this happen? How could no one care enough to intervene? Elijah sniffled softly, burying his face in her shoulder. Jasmine kissed the top of his head, fighting back tears of her own. She didn't know what came next, but one thing was certain. She couldn't let this end here. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table late that night, her fingers trembling as she uploaded the videos to social media. "This is what happened today," she typed in the caption, tagging local news outlets and civil rights organizations. Her voice cracked slightly as she recorded a brief message over the footage. "Please, someone has to care about this." Within hours, her post exploded. Notifications poured in. Thousands of comments flooded the thread, each one more supportive than the last. "You're not alone, Jasmine," read one reply. Another declared, "We see you and we stand with you." For the first time since the chaos erupted, Jasmine felt a flicker of hope. People were listening, not just watching, but genuinely outraged on her behalf. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, collective voices could shine light where none seemed possible. But as dawn approached, an unexpected twist awaited her, a development that would change everything. The next morning, a plain brown envelope arrived at Jasmine's doorstep. She opened it cautiously, her breath catching as she sifted through its contents. Documents detailed Mr. Thompson's illegal activities, tax fraud, embezzlement schemes, and even ties to a hate group. Her mind raced. Who had sent this? A note tucked inside provided clarity. He deserves to be exposed, from someone who knows his corruption firsthand. It didn't take long for Jasmine to piece together the likely source. One of Mr. Thompson's disgruntled former business partners, fed up with his unethical practices. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition. With these documents, she could dismantle the very foundation of his power. Clutching the papers tightly, Jasmine felt a surge of determination. Karma might be slow, but it was finally catching up. By midday, federal agents descended upon Mr. Thompson's house, their presence commanding attention. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering nervously as agents combed through his property, hauling out boxes of files and digital devices. Mr. Thompson stormed onto his porch, red-faced and furious. "This is all her fault," he shouted, pointing accusingly toward Jasmine's home. "She set me up. None of this would have happened if she hadn't caused trouble." But this time, no one believed him. His usual bravado crumbled under the weight of undeniable facts. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others muttering apologies they'd never dared to say before. Jasmine watched from afar, her heart pounding as justice unfolded before her eyes. For once, the system worked, not because it chose to, but because people forced it to. From her porch, Jasmine observed the scene unfold, Elijah nestled safely in her arms. The air buzzed with tension, yet she felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, a quiet strength born from resilience. Marcus joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We did it," he murmured softly, his voice thick with emotion. Jasmine nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't over, not completely, but for the first time in days she allowed herself to believe that things could get better, that maybe, just maybe, standing up against injustice wasn't futile after all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the neighborhood, Jasmine realized something profound. Change didn't happen overnight, but every step forward mattered, and this was only the beginning. The sound of the front door creaking open broke the quiet tension that had lingered in the house for days. Marcus stepped inside, his face etched with exhaustion but relief washing over him as Jasmine rushed forward. "Thank God," she whispered, pulling him into a tight embrace. Elijah clung to his leg, giggling softly despite the gravity of everything they'd endured. "They dropped the charges," Marcus said hoarsely, holding them both close. "No evidence, just like we knew there wouldn't be." Jasmine nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence was enough to convey the weight of their shared pain and their resilience. They had survived something unimaginable, and now, standing together, they began to heal. But even as hope filled the room, the scars of injustice remained fresh. This wasn't just about one family. It was about all families who faced similar battles every day. By morning, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Not hostility this time, but support. Donations poured in from unexpected places, grocery gift cards, cash envelopes tucked discreetly under their doormat, toys for Elijah, and heartfelt notes offering solidarity. A young woman knocked on their door holding a box of clothes. "I saw what happened online," she said softly. "I can't imagine how hard it must have been, but I wanted you to know you're not alone." Jasmine accepted the gesture with gratitude, though part of her still braced against rejection. Change didn't come easily, especially when trust had been shattered. Yet, seeing neighbors step up, even those who had once stayed silent, gave her a glimmer of faith in humanity. It wasn't perfect redemption, but it was progress, and sometimes progress was all anyone could ask for. That evening, the streets outside Mr. Thompson's home transformed into a sea of voices united by purpose. Protesters gathered peacefully, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and chanting slogans demanding accountability for systemic racism. Local news crews captured the scene, amplifying Jasmine's story nationwide. Reporters interviewed activists, neighbors, and even strangers who had traveled miles to join the cause. One speaker stood atop a makeshift platform, addressing the crowd. "This isn't just about one man or one family," they declared passionately. "It's about dismantling the systems that allow hatred and bias to thrive unchecked. We owe it to ourselves and future generations to fight for real change." Jasmine watched from afar, her heart swelling with pride and determination. What had started as a personal ordeal had ignited a movement far greater than she ever imagined. As the protest continued, federal agents arrived at Mr. Thompson's doorstep once more. This time, handcuffs clicked around his wrists as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. His face twisted in rage, he screamed accusations toward Jasmine's direction. "She framed me. None of this would have happened if she hadn't stirred things up." But no one listened. The evidence spoke louder than his lies. Tax fraud, embezzlement, ties to hate groups. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Jasmine felt no satisfaction in watching him led away, only a sense of vindication. Justice wasn't revenge. It was balance restored. Still, knowing he would finally face consequences brought a measure of peace she hadn't thought possible. Yet, the work wasn't done. Not yet. Later that night, Jasmine and Marcus stood side by side on their porch, watching Elijah chase fireflies in the yard. Laughter bubbled from him, pure and unburdened, a stark contrast to the turmoil they'd faced. "We did it," Marcus murmured, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. Jasmine nodded, smiling through tears. "Yeah, we did." For a moment, the world felt lighter, as if the storm clouds had parted, revealing a sliver of sunlight. But they both knew the fight for equity and justice extended beyond their small victory. It was a lifelong journey, one they were committed to walking hand in hand. As the screen faded to black, text appeared. "Change starts when we stand together." What would you have done if you were in Jasmine's shoes? The question lingered, heavy and thought-provoking, inviting viewers to step into her world. Imagine facing hostility simply for trying to provide for your family. How far would you go to stand up for what's right? Jasmine's story wasn't just hers. It reflected the struggles of countless others who faced similar injustices daily. Her resilience sparked a challenge. Could empathy lead to action? Viewers were encouraged to share their thoughts in the comments, creating a space for dialogue and understanding. Would you have fought back, walked away, or found another way to make your voice heard? Each response mattered, adding depth to the conversation and strengthening the connection between the audience and the narrative. But reflecting was only the first step. What came next was even more important. Did this story inspire you to take action against injustice? Let us know. The prompt pushed beyond reflection, urging viewers to consider how they could contribute to meaningful change. Stories like Jasmine's weren't meant to end with the credits. They were catalysts for real-world impact. Whether it was speaking out against microaggressions, supporting marginalized communities, or educating others about systemic racism, every effort counted. The transformative power of storytelling lay in its ability to bridge gaps and ignite movements. By sharing their own experiences or plans for advocacy, viewers became part of something larger than themselves, a collective push toward equity and justice. And while individual actions might seem small, together they created waves of progress. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in fighting for equality, the message urged, emphasizing the importance of engagement. Subscribe for more powerful stories that spark change. Every click, share, and comment amplified voices that often went unheard. It wasn't just about passive consumption. It was about active participation in a movement striving for fairness and unity. "Together we can make a difference," the final tagline read. leaving viewers with a sense of empowerment. Collective effort outweighed apathy, and staying engaged meant continuing the fight long after the screen faded to black. This wasn't the end. It was an invitation to keep going, to remain vigilant, and be the change the world desperately needed.